also involved. Europe's pharmaceutical firms are preparing a hedge against U.S. import duties, and Europe's pharmaceutical firms, they are rushing to prepare for the potential fallout of that import duties, with some forming tariff task forces. Yeah, that's what analysts have called it, and they are warning that these levies on the sector could break global trade rules. Companies say that they've installed their first ever tariff task force to manage uncertainty surrounding U.S. President Donald Trump's proposed trade charges, with some production likely to be directly impacted. President Trump, of course, has signaled that the European Union may be next to face sweeping 25% tariffs on its exports to the U.S., mirroring similar threats toward Canada and Mexico. And of course, we'll be discussing this on our with our Berlin colleagues on Business Incorporated. So you can watch at 1 p.m. and get more on that. And still connected to the Trump tariff is what's going on in the metal space. Gold price is largely unchanged in Asian trading today, supported by safe haven demand as U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs on Mexico and Canada come into effect. Spot gold was steady, 2,892.98 per ounce. Now let's find out what all of this means to the commodities space, and we're having that conversation with Chief Narrative Officer, Clear's Advisory, Ted George. Ted, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. It's good to be back.
Yeah. So World Trade Organization had already warned that, this tariff and retaliatory tariff is not going to do anyone any good. Yet we see the spirit of protectionism taking charge, especially coming from the United States. And I wonder what the world will feel in the area of commodities pricing, commodities demand, and even raw materials. The other day it was microchip that was in focus. I wonder what this year would look like by December if this trend continues.
Well, it's not a very good trend at all for commodities, and it's a great shame because, as you're probably aware on your program, you've been talking for the last 2 years about record commodity prices. We saw oil, gas, metals shooting up. We saw cocoa over $10,000 a ton, and really in the last few months they've been coming down, the commodity prices, particularly things like food. If you look at wheat and corn, they're the lowest they've been since around the start of 2020, which is when the whole latest cycle of super prices started. And so there was some hope that the world had got on top of inflation, and tariffs are just the worst thing on every level, because not only do tariffs obviously drive up prices, but they usually lead to a drop in consumer sentiment. We've already seen some examples of this in America. There's a real dropping of sentiment, but also a drop in investment because there's uncertainty. All of this feeds into actually driving up prices further. So I think there's a real concern that actually where we have had some real gains in recent months with commodity prices falling, we can see them rising again because of this disruption and uncertainty. And the truth is that, if one person puts up a tariff and another nation puts up one in return, in the end, both sides lose. We learned this the hard way in the 30s, but it seems we're back where we were then.
In all of this, I spoke to someone in Black American the other day, and he was really passionate about what Africa should be doing. And you did mention cocoa. Most of these materials, some of these, agricultural material, commodities especially, we have them in Africa. What should Africa be doing at this point with the tariff war waging all around?
Well, in the case of Africa, the tariffs are not too significant in terms of what the United States is proposing, because the US is actually a relatively small player when it comes to Africa. The US is big stuff in the Americas, it's very important in Asia, and obviously in Western Europe in terms of its importance for security. But in Africa, it's around the fourth or the fifth largest trading partner, and it's probably only around the third or the fourth largest investment partner. The EU, China, India, the UAE, they're far more important to Africa Africa. And so my own view is I think the US administration needs to tread carefully when it's in Africa. It doesn't have the same clout there that it does in the rest of the world. And in fact, most of the exports of Africa to the US, they used to be oil. There's a lot less of that now because the US has increased its own production. But it's only certain sectors that are threatened. If we think about AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, a lot of South Africa's car exports go to the USA under that. So that could really hurt South Africa and that particular sector. But generally speaking, I think the US has to tread carefully, because if it's worried about other countries falling under the influence of Russia and China and India, if it starts pushing a very hard tariff and aggressive policy on trade in Africa, it could push them right into their arms.
Yeah, but Africa has to be ready. Africa has more of raw materials without adding value. I guess that's why they're even talking about the cocoa exchange now, if that could, help package some of those products for international exports.
Absolutely. And this is a project I'm working on for the International Cocoa Organization to create an Africa Cocoa Exchange. And the idea is to trade cocoa in Africa, not as it currently is in London and New York, which is very far from the farm gate. And the real aim here is to give more transparency, to actually cut out a lot of the middlemen, and to enable the farmers, the cooperatives, the local processors to get a better price, a more accurate price, but also a lot more value addition as well. So I really think this question about value addition is so critical to Africa. Africa also has the youngest population in the world, which is growing. There is an opportunity here when we look at the outsourcing of jobs as well. And so this could be an opportunity to grasp onto that, particularly as we see some of these more traditional areas which were manufacturing hubs, take China, simply become too expensive compared to other parts of the world.
Yeah, but Africa still has to think about its infrastructure. Does it have its infrastructure developed to enable its export? That's also seems to be another challenge.
Absolutely. And look, I think, as everyone knows, the big issue above all is power. It's all about energy. As you'll know, in Nigeria, there are some people who live in Lagos who have 3 generators. One in case the network goes down, another in case their generator breaks, and another as an emergency for the generator of the generator. This problem about not being able to guarantee power is really problematic if you're trying to have some kind of industry. And obviously, if you're doing something agricultural, you need to cool a product. You need electricity. So that's one of the keys. But the other thing, of course, is everything about roads and ports and infrastructure. Too many of the roads are insufficient. There's way too much clogging of the ports and the basic networks for trade. So I think that's really where the focus has to be. And there's a huge amount of investment needed. I think they're talking about something like $130 billion a year. So a lot of that is going to have to come from other parts of the world. We need in Africa to get more investors into these critical sectors.
Yeah, we certainly do need that, George. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Good to have you back. Hope you stay with us, the Chief Narrative Officer of Players Advisory.
My pleasure.
All right, Ladi. So it's a war out there, but Africa does have some opportunities. But the question is Africa ready for it? Because you don't just wake up and go into export to fill in the gap, perhaps, of the trade relationship between China and the US, for instance. You need to have developed your infrastructure, your products, your agricultural produce to be able to meet up with the demand and the standards. And
Africa should have started this yesterday, but it's never too late to start. And I did hear Ted there mention some Nigerians have 2 or 3 generators. But the solar gang will say, what's a generator at this point?
Right,
thank you so much, Aunty, for giving us the details. So that's the show today. Thank you for watching. I'm Ladi Williams from me and the team right here at Channels HQ's. Bye for now. See you at 1 p.m.